Do you remember what it feels like to be comfortable in your own skin? Not just confident, but also pain-free, relaxed, healthy, and carefree. Think about the most robust version of your own childhood body. This is what lifeiness feels like, a joyful spirit and a vibrant physical state of being. I'm your guide, Professor Sarah, storyteller, teacher, and wellness enthusiast. Reach into the vitality of your own girlhood to supercharge your grown-up life. So a few years ago, I started a nutrition and lifestyle journey that has really transformed my life in all of the best ways. It was actually my friend and nutritionist, Christian Taylor, who got me thinking differently about some things. I'd been hanging on to these ideas and practices that were not aligned with my body. I was also extremely anemic and I had terrible acne for years and years. At this point, I was under a lot of stress and my hormones were probably out of balance. Actually, they were out of balance. She did some tests with me. But I also suspected that my gut was at the root of some of these issues since I also had digestive issues. I had no idea to what extent, but I was determined to get to the bottom of it. More than 2 years later, I'm completely acne-free. I have a happy tummy. I'm also pretty calm and relaxed most of the time, and most of all, joyful. So I sat down with Christian recently to discuss this relationship between joy and food, between mental health and good nutrition. Christian Taylor is a functional nutritionist with a holistic approach. She holds a master's degree in health and nutrition education, and she counsels patients dealing with weight, digestive issues, autoimmune conditions, cancer recovery, addiction recovery, and hormone balancing. She's also a certified yoga instructor. I hope you find something of value for your own body and your health in the following discussion with Christian. Enjoy.
It's so much more joyful to eat food that's colorful and has texture, like an appealing texture. You can have something that's very yummy, but if the texture's off, it just doesn't appeal. You can't, you're forcing it down. So I think it's a great thing to just check in with. I think stressful environments we already know this scientifically, that when you eat in a emotional state, or when you're angry or dealing with grief or stressed out or in a rush, you don't digest your food well. All the hormones at play, all the chemical responses, everything going on biochemically in the body, it's not really an environment for digesting. So I always tell my clients and friends and family, if you are emotional, meaning strong emotions such as anger, you're crying, you're upset, you're depressed, avoid eating and do something else that's nurturing for that emotion. So if you're stressed out, maybe go exercise or go do a meditation or take a warm bath or go for a walk rather than stress eating. So you hear about this in our culture a lot, stress eating, and just the anxiety around food and food preparation. But I think the most important part is to have fun selecting the most nutritious food that looks appealing to you when you're shopping. So when you're in the grocery store, make sure you give yourself some time and select the most beautiful, best smelling fresh food that you can. And then when you go to prepare that, enjoy the process. And the more you think about it and the more of a chore it becomes, it raises the anxiety around food. And that's where we run into unhealthy relationships with food.
Yeah, that makes me think of there are different levels of disordered eating that, like, when you're talking about like emotion around food, it's so hard to fit in food preparation, like calm food preparation, and even like enough time to eat.
Yeah, I do recommend that for busy families and especially people who um, kind of, yeah, they've got lots of kids and after school activities and things like that, to have a meal prep day and even include the children and put on fun music and make it something, because we're all going to get hungry at some point, right? And so we know that we want nutritious food on hand. I want to kind of cycle back to where you started with the discussion surrounding eating disorders and things like that. Um, Essentially, all eating disorders, at least in my opinion, stem from a need to control, whether that comes from a vanity perspective, like we want to control our weight or the way we look, or we want some sort of feeling of control over our life. And, because food is a voluntary, to feed yourself, that's a voluntary act. When it becomes something that we control, so there is some discipline involved, healthy discipline surrounding eating, like binge eating would be like a loss of control. And then the way that you control the outcome of that would be to purge it. Like that eating, disordered eating pattern causes a lot of damage to your esophagus. That is where we affiliate the feelings of guilt. Again, it's emotional eating, like, I need this, I have no control, everything's out of control, and I'm just going to eat until whatever I want until I'm full. And then you immediately feel guilty. And then you start creating anxiety around, well, now I'm going to gain weight. And so you purge, and then it starts this cycle. And it's really just a mental condition rather than, that leads to disordered eating.
Right.
So we could do a whole segment in that, and maybe at a later date around some healthy strategies about, it really is positive self-speak and setting limits to eating while we're building and designing healthy eating habits for ourselves. It's not a one-fits-all kind of thing. Some people love to make a whole ritual out of eating. They sit down, they say a prayer of thankfulness. They chew their food slowly. It's not a time to talk. You'll see this in a lot of Buddhist communities, quiet meal times, chewing meditations and things like that. So there's all kinds of strategies in developing disciplines around healthy eating habits. But it all goes back to finding what works for the individual so that they can assimilate the nutrition from the foods that they choose to eat.
Do you have an example from a client of yours in your practice that, not necessarily an eating disorder, but maybe they were overweight? So clearly there was some disorder there. And kind of fixing that or changing that?
Sure. Well, a lot of my clients find me and first come to me because they want to get a handle on their weight. So this is a great question in that. And we'll just kind of focus on that because there's lots of things surrounding how someone can get to a place where they feel overweight. Now, some people come to me and they don't look overweight to me, but they think they're overweight or they're not feeling comfortable on their frame. So sometimes we'll investigate, BMIs and different things to just educate them about, body structure, body composition, and things like that, just to help them come to terms with conscious thoughts about weight. But if someone truly is overweight, usually I do a lot of assessments and a lot of questions to try to get to understand my client's lifestyle, their childhood, um, when they first started to notice that their weight was packing on. Sometimes it is hormonal imbalance, and sometimes it is physiological. I think with what we're talking about today, if it's coming from a mental space that leads to obesity or being overweight and unhealthy, it usually comes from the mindset of coming from a place of lack. Scarcity. That scarcity mindset. It's like, I don't have enough, so I'm going to hoard this I'm going to make sure I have enough to eat. It's right. Fear-based eating. Yeah. So of course there's fear-based eating, and then you get to a place where it starts to affect your energy levels and your hormone levels and all of this. So then you start down this path of all these other factors that start to affect your relationship with food.
Right. So all because you have kind of a primal feeling that there's not going to be enough of whatever.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say that most disordered eating comes from a place it comes from a mental space. It comes from a healthy relationship with food. Food is nutrition. We were given taste buds on our tongues, and that's part of our creation. That's part of our bodies. We're supposed to enjoy the sensations of taste and flavor. That's why we can taste something and know that it's gone bad, or it's rancid, or we shouldn't be eating that.
Right.
So that's part of the pleasure sensors, and that gives us the dopamine rushes. That's why sugar is so addictive, because it hits all the sensations and is highly addictive, but it also leads to inflammation. And that's where education and making sensible choices. I mean, we can't live on sugar, or we would not get the nutrition that we need, and we lead to a lot of other health conditions.
So I wonder, because I love the idea of being comfortable in your own skin, which can mean a lot of things, and it's usually used kind of figuratively for confidence. Be comfortable in your own skin.
Sure.
But I like the idea, like physiologically, like to really feel comfortable where like you're not worried about the way your clothes fit. Like you really feel comfortable. You feel like with the Ayurvedic diet and kind of, kind of looking into my own dosha and starting to eat things that were warm and cozy and were better for me or for my constitution. And then I started feeling more comfortable. And that was like a new idea in nutrition and eating. And I was a nutrition major at first in college. Like I've always been fascinated by what you put in your mouth, how it can affect your life. But like I'd never really kind of embraced it that way. And I feel like I probably ate too many cold things and raw things. And once I started eating according to that, I started feeling comfortable. And I love that idea of feeling relaxed around eating and food and nutrition. Can you speak to that? I'd love to hear what you have to say about just joy and comfort when it comes to food, and maybe the way that you conduct your own life that brings you comfort and joy in your own skin.
Yeah, I think, there's lots of strategies to grow into comfort within your body. The advice that I give is to eat with the seasons, so that way we don't get bored, right? With our food choices, like in the cold months, we're looking for warm, easy to digest foods because we're usually less active outside. We're inside more. The days are shorter. A lot of root vegetables and stews and hearty soups and things like that. Whereas in summer, when it's hot outside and we've got the long hours of sunshine and we're out, and we eat more hydrating food like fresh fruits, and that's when the watermelons come out, and more salads and and raw foods and cold foods. So I usually try to just build an awareness around eating with the seasons, eating what's readily grown in your climate and culture during that time of the year. Like if you live down in the tropics, it's gonna be readily accessible to grab coconut water, grab coconut things, or bananas and plantains and citrus and things like that. Or if you're, in a different region, you're eating differently. So maybe more meats or grass grazing animals, or, so I'm a big proponent of, and I really think there is, we're intelligently designed to eat food from where we live. Our bodies adapt to the climates and to the crops and food sources available to that. We live in a world where we can get things from the tropics in a day on a food truck, but it does lose nutrition. Yeah. Most things are not picked at peak ripeness, so they haven't fully matured with their nutrient composition. Then they sit on a truck and then they sit on shelves. And by the time, so for instance, a strawberry is picked, probably still green. It's put in the plastic container. It's sent to a plant, goes on a truck, then it goes to your grocery store. By the time you get it, you purchase it, and then get around to eating it from your own refrigerator, there's only about 10% vitality left in that food source. So that's why we've started eating more or supplementing through supplements to get the nutrition that we need from our food. And that's where we're seeing an obesity crisis, and especially in America, is because not only are we eating more, we're not getting the nutrition. We're not chewing our food. We're not digesting it properly.
So we're malnourished, but we're overweight.
And I see this every day. Yeah. I mean, this is a whole nother, I could talk for hours on this. So I want to stay focused on what you're truly asking. But it's finding rituals around food that bring joy to the process. Now, in the summer, I keep it simple because I'd rather be hanging out with my kids and going to the beach and being outside enjoying the sunshine, or on a hike. So I'm grabbing nuts, I'm grabbing fruits, I'm grabbing, things like that, and really enjoying the sweetness of it, the fullness of it, and eating things in season.
Right. No, I think you definitely answered that question. And I think that I like that what you said about we are intelligent, like our bodies are intelligent and we will adapt. But I think sometimes our bodies are not intelligent because we've been giving them the wrong things.
Sure.
How do you get back to a place where you can kind of trust your body? Meaning, like, I like to listen to my body and listen to what I feel like eating. If I need to, eat a cheeseburger one day, I want to just do that. But I know that I've been in a place in the past where I've been sugar addicted. So I couldn't really trust what my body's, wisdom. My body wasn't feeling wise. How do you kind of get to a place where your body can start or you can start listening to the cues of your body?
So this is going to be an individual question. And the reason I want to just preface by saying that is every person who comes to me, there's a different road to get to where their goals. Most people say, I want to be healthy. I'm like, okay, but we're going to have to develop strategies along that journey that are measurable so you can see that it's working and what's not working. We want sustainable, healthy lifestyle choices, right? And habits in our life. So for me, like if somebody comes and their hormones are out of whack and they're like, I hardly eat anything and I'm gaining weight. And now my thyroid's underactive and all these things. Well, they're just sustaining themselves on caffeine and sugar to get through the day. And so for a client like that, we would start to educate about eating small meals to stabilize your metabolism, because hormones and digestion and our body clocks and all of that comes into play.
Yeah.
The seasons obviously come into play, food choices come into play, but as we're developing healthy habits around eating, I recommend eating 5 small meals a day, like eating every 3 hours. But then this is where people can get into that controlling mindset and the anxiety that surrounds that. Once someone comes to stable and they have worked through all of the obstacles to having a healthy relationship with food, then we shift into a eat when you're hungry, make sensible choices, stop when you're full. I usually suggest eating till your belly's half full. And this takes some getting to know yourself and understanding, like, okay, last time I had this meal, I was definitely felt full when I finished, and then I just didn't feel energetic. The goal to eating is to have energy and to have nutrition.
Right. Yeah.
It's not meant to lay you out on the couch. And you started to mention before about having cramping and bloating and all these digestive problems are things that we tackle through healthy food combination. I loved how you mentioned Ayurvedic. I look into Ayurvedic. I look at their doshas, their constitution, and we start, and I do food testing as well, food sensitivities. Right. We look for IgE antibodies and all kinds of things to help figure out what your body's asking for.
Right.
And, I also suggest fasting and giving your mind, your body, everything a rest from food selection. Sitting with, especially if someone is overweight, like sometimes we'll do a fast for 3 to 5 days of just lemon water. Your body will pull from fat reserves, and it's completely safe to do. But just letting your digestive system take a break and sitting with the urges of eating and understanding your relationship with food. If we don't pause, and that's when things can get out of control quickly.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are scared of the idea of fasting, but I think you're right. Like, that is powerful when you think about it, to not eat, just to give things a rest for even like 12 hours or 16 hours. I know that's what I do almost every single day, but I never feel underfed or I never feel hungry. Like, once I get hungry, then I'll eat.
Yeah.
And I don't think I knew that about myself, a few years ago. And it was like, once I learned that my body does not want to eat in the morning.
Right.
So you're right about, like, it's different for every person.
Yeah. And you also have to look, that's why food journals, when I'm working with a client, and sleep journals and emotional journals, like I have them kind of record everything so I can see. We have to remember that caffeine, coffee consumption first thing in the morning is big in our culture. Caffeine is a suppressant. It's a stimulant for our systems, but it's a digestive suppressant. So it suppresses hunger is what it does. So if what you're doing first thing in the morning is grabbing a cup of coffee, of course you're not going to be hungry, but that still might not be what's best for your body.
Right.
And then you're not eating till 1 or 2 o'clock. And then you're like, by then you're famished and you're grabbing, pizza or a sandwich or something that's not really what's best for your body type. And you wonder why you're gaining weight and you're skipping meals. Right. That skipping meals is usually when I see people do it unintentionally, or they're doing it chemically, like through caffeine consumption. That's usually a red flag for me, because they're not honoring their true body's needs. They're chemically altering their true body's needs. And so that's why if you're going to fast, it should be intentional. And when you fast, you're not drinking coffee, drinking lemon water. You can add an organic maple syrup for the B vitamins and minerals and some fast energy through a healthy living source, plant-based source. I'm not a fan of refined white sugar, obviously, for an energy source, but maple syrup in your water to make it more kind of like a lemonade, but all healthy, would be a fine strategy to look at your body's needs throughout the day.
Right. So you can be more in tune with it.
Yeah. So
because that's what we were talking about before, like kind of coming back to what is my body telling me? What do I need? Right. I guess you can't know if you're taking.
Yeah, I that's why I do what I do, because there is a need for coaching through this. Not everyone knows where to start. They see a TikTok video or something about the latest fad and how this will help you lose weight. And then they try that, and then they might lose weight. And then they pack on an extra 20 when they go back to their normal things, or they can't sustain buying that product anymore. So I really think working with a nutritionist, working with someone who understands the holistic approach to healthcare, like an Ayurvedic practitioner or functional nutritionist like myself, working with someone who understands body systems, understands metabolism, the detox pathways, nutrient deficiencies, and how to look for those. Like when I meet with a client, I can look at their nail beds, their tongue, their eyes, their skin, their hair, their body composition, and know that they are most likely deficient in this mineral or this nutrient, and if they start telling me,
that's so interesting.
It is, and that's why functional nutrition is a rising science. And I think soon we're getting to a point where we're going to be able to look at someone's genetic code and know right away that they shouldn't be eating dairy, or they can't tolerate this food or that food, just based on their genetics.
Yeah, that would be so much more convenient rather than going through this diet and that diet and the other thing.
Right. Well, for instance, just I'm going to throw one little thing out there. Like the Asian community, the reason why a lot of rice is in their region where rice grows readily there. Well, they're born through the descendants and through the adaptation with a larger pancreas than someone, say, born in the European countries where rice is not readily grown.
Yeah.
And so because of that larger organ, they are able to digest rice easier than someone, say, from European descent. Yeah. And we see this all over the place. That's why, we live in this big wide world, but the genetics and the adaptations over centuries and centuries, that's why Europeans can digest dairy better.
Right.
You don't see dairy in like Chinese cuisine.
Right.
Because they can't digest it as readily, but then you have someone with, Chinese origin coming to America, where we eat a lot of, different food, a lot of dairy-ridden foods, lots of butters and things like that. Or, then they're going to start to have weight gain. Whereas someone, it's just, there's genetics factor in for sure. I'm going a little.
No, that's so interesting because, people say things like, well, why don't French people gain weight and they eat all this butter and cheese? Because you're right, it's different for everybody. And we live in such a Americans are so diverse. Not only are we diverse, but like within families, we're diverse. And so having that genetic code would be really helpful, because you might have a Chinese mother and, a French father, then you don't know what your mix is, necessarily digestively.
And that's where we see chronic illness and diseases. We call them genetic, but it's because we're predisposed to those if we're eating not away from our genetics.
Right.
So like a European family that moves to, let's just use the same example, China, and they're eating the Chinese local cuisine, they're going to develop different, probably, autoimmune disorders that run in their lineage because centuries and centuries, their genetics, made them, it was easier for them to digest dairy and beef products and things like that.
Right.
So,
yeah, and just like on a micro level with that same example, it's just like going to a country and drinking the water there that the locals can drink.
Sure.
Because they've adapted to it.
Correct. And now with world travel and all of the melting and the world's gotten smaller, to say, like, it's easier to, people are meeting and marrying people from different countries and different things exposed. And so most countries around the world do parasitic cleanses as part of their day-to-day, or not day-to-day, but they do routine regular, parasitic cleanses, whereas Americans don't. And so we're seeing a lot of parasitic infections that lead to chronic illness in our country. And we need to go back to those roots, because you can pick up a parasite from a partner, an intimate partner. You can pick up parasites by going to another country, by getting bit by one of their insects, by, by eating fruit that is washed in their water. Yeah. So you can pick up parasites. So now that we're traveling worldwide, now that we're coming into contact with other people who travel worldwide, we really need to adopt some of the health strategies that have been handed down century by centuries. So that's why the science around nutrition is constantly changing, and we get conflicting information, is because we're trying to educate people as if we're all the same. Right. And I'm not saying that humans are not all the same, but we have different genetics. We live in different regions of the world, and that does factor into our overall health.
Well, what's so fascinating about that is that the Ayurvedic practices, which I'm circling back to that because since we've mentioned it, I kind of want you to say what that is just briefly.
Okay.
It's fascinating, though, that has lasted for so many centuries and does work for so many people of different origins.
Yeah,
it's a lot of different things.
It's over 2,000 years old. Yes, it was handed down from the Vedas. It actually, Ayurveda means the science of life. So it's not just nutrition; it's the science. And this is a very, mind, body, soul, holistic approach to healthcare is what Ayurveda. It is the science of life. So there's different constitutions, and again, we could spend hours discussing this, but the overall findings from Ayurvedic, because they're handed down from the ancients, and that's how we've survived as a species, being able to, before so-called Western medicine, before vaccines, before all these things, Ayurvedic doctors or health practitioners would, look at the visual symptoms and would investigate a person's internal symptoms. And that's how you could start to get to the root cause of your issues. And that's where Ayurveda looks at basically all illness arises from an imbalance within your body. Whether you're out of balance with nature, with the circadian rhythms, with your moon cycle. Our bodies are made up of the same elements that the earth is made up, regardless of what your spiritual beliefs are. Right. If you want to go into, I know in America, there's a lot of Judeo-Christian background, but coming from that root that God created Adam from the dust of the earth. That's true. Whether you want to come from a atheist, worldview or a religious background view, we do come from the dust.
Right.
We do come from the elements of the earth. Our bodies are made up of the same things that the earth is made up of and the stars are made up of. And so disregarding that in our overall health perspective is a disservice, because that's how we take care of these bodies essentially borrowed from the earth.
Right. Yeah, so that's Ayurveda is like the most holistic,
comprehensive
approach. Yeah, comprehensive approach, and that having a sense of positive embodiment, meaning like feeling like you're, like you mentioned at the very beginning, like instead of like when you're emotional, like try to check in with yourself first. And I think some people have lost kind of that ability to become positively embodied, to, you know, feel that embodiment so that they can check in, see how they're feeling, see if they're hungry. And what she was saying is that with what happened with addiction was that she just felt so disembodied, so kind of disassociated, so kind of separate from nature. That's kind of what I took from it.
And from herself.
Separate from herself, but also, I mean, as an extension, you're separate from the elements, you're separate from nature itself. And that can create so much disorder mentally.
Yeah, so this kind of taps into my work with the trauma-informed yoga that I do work with overdose to recovery and addiction patients. And one of the things, it's just, well, first of all, the most important relationship that we will ever have is the one that we have with ourselves. And learning what our body's needs are and how to take care of ourselves. And to also understand that our bodies are, for all intents and purposes, our homes. It's where we live inside of there. No one else really gets to know what it's like to live inside of our body, our experience. And it's also our responsibility to take care of that body. No one else is going to do it for us, because no one else can experience through the senses or the sensations of the physical body like we are experiencing it. So this disembodiment, this detachment, and this discomfort inside of our own skin, our own body, and kind of wrapping back to that first question, you know, finding joy and being comfortable in our own skin, is understanding that our body is a gift. It's the place where we live. And spending time in stillness, in feeling the subtle sensations, feeling your heartbeat, touching your thumb and your fingertip together and feeling your pulse, your aliveness, bringing the awareness to this breath. What is this breath? We breathe in and we breathe out. Like, think about it. You breathe in, that's the first thing you do in your human body when you're born. First thing a baby does is fill its lungs with its first breath. And the last thing you'll do before you leave your body behind and it goes back to the earth. We just borrow it from the earth, right? And then it goes back into the earth. The last thing you'll do is take your last breath, and then your breath will leave and you will leave the body. And so it's nice to be able to just pause, connect to your breath, which I call a life force and energy. And then you briefly touched on emotions and that disembodiment, that emotions. We can feel totally disconnected from our bodies just by experiencing emotion. And what I always, remind, again, my trauma patients and addiction patients, is that emotion is just energy in motion. Motion, it's spelled emotion, is energy in motion. And so an emotion is a tool that the body uses to alert you that something needs your attention. There's not bad emotions or good emotions. There's some that are more pleasant and some that are harder to allow to move through us, like anger and grief and things like that. But they are, in fact, meant to move through our physical bodies. This is where we start to see long-term illness, when we trap emotions that are meant to move through and be transmuted. Like trapping grief and depression, we store that around our heart, of course, or in our chest. You'll see chronic illness of the lungs for people that struggle with depression. People who struggle with anxiety and worry and those emotions, they struggle with digestive issues because we hold those emotions, stop normal functioning of your digestive tract. Anger gets trapped in your liver. Your liver is responsible for 1,000 different functions in your body, including hormones. So you see, and not just, sexual hormones like reproductive health, but also stress hormones like high cortisol levels and high insulin levels and diabetes and all of those things usually stem from repressed anger that's stored in the liver. And so when you're looking at hormonal imbalance, I go back to stuck emotions. And this is where you get into, somatic healing and, there's so many different holistic modalities, the tapping, the releasing of stuck energy, emotions, acupuncture, all these things. There's so many things that when you work together and you work with a holistic practitioner, part of the work is coming into body awareness. It's not just one thing.
Right.
You can't just say, oh, my liver is sick. Well, if your liver is sick, you have hormonal imbalance and you have detox pathway imbalances and you have, so there's a host of things that become affected. So, and if you're fearful, we hold these in our kidneys. That's a filter. But I mean, there's a reason, there's a saying that I'm so scared I peed my pants. It's like, our kidneys are associated with fear. And if we have repressed fear, we may develop kidney stones and all kinds of things. So emotion is energy. And if that energy gets trapped in our organs and in our tissues and in parts of our body, like I was just discussing, will lead to illness. And you can take supplements and you can eat perfectly and you can manipulate this and that and this and that. But if you're not healthy emotionally and you're not healthy mentally, then it doesn't matter how healthy you think your physical body is, because it's all connected. Part of deep trauma work and addiction recovery work is getting the individual to identify what emotions they're actually feeling. So some people have felt fear so much, but that fear makes them immediately start worrying and anxiety. So like you've got fear in your kidneys, you've got anxiety in your belly, you've got all this pain in your low back and your digestive issues, and it's just a mess. But it's getting people to identify, are you angry or are you frustrated? Why are you angry? Are you angry because you need to set a boundary with that person? Right. Are you angry because that person doesn't agree with you? They don't have to agree with you. Right. They have their own reality. Their moral code may be different than your moral code. Right. And they don't have to be the same. So your anger is poisoning yourself. You're not harming that person that you're angry with. And so just getting them to separate emotions and to start to see that stuck emotions are leading towards their mental health, their physical health, their emotional health, all of it, their energetic health. We are energetic beings. We have an energy, which we call chi, moving through the organs on a 24-hour clock cycle. You can look into it, Chinese medicine, which is the same age as Ayurveda. I look to both because they arose at the same time in our history, and they both really speak to the same thing. It takes the holistic approach to overall health and wellness to keep your body and mind sound.
And I think having a professional to help you identify those emotions, because it's like, if you've been fearful since you were 2.5 years
Yes.
old,
Yes.
how do you know what it means to be a human body that doesn't have fear running through it all the time? So you definitely have to have somebody to help you identify that.
And it's coming to a safe place like a therapy office or or a massage table or wherever you feel safe, and being willing to face that fear in that safe space. And that's part of a therapist's work, is creating a safe environment and a state of trust where that person can be vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, those things can rise to the surface because you're not suppressing them. And then a lot of things that were suppressed, people had forgotten about. They had forgotten the trauma took place, or they suppressed it so deeply. So I am not a therapist or a licensed therapist, but I really highly suggest that anyone dealing with an unhealthy relationship to food and or has had addictive habits. So it doesn't have to be drug addiction. It doesn't. You don't have to be an overdose, to recovery client. It could be alcohol, yes. It could be substances, yes. But it could be food. It could be pornography. It could be, controlling OCD. It could be any host of addictive shopping. Lots of addictions out there, or controlling others, or whatever makes you feel in control or more in control. That's where an addiction arises. When you can sit in a safe space and understand that everything outside of your physical body really is out of your control. The weather's out of your control. Getting upset about the fact that it's raining is just going to really ruin your day, because we can't control it, right? Trying to control someone else in the way that they treat us is really wasted energy. If that person isn't good for you, place a boundary. Don't spend time with them. It's like, control what you can control from the inside out. And that is how we get to a place of healthy lifestyle habits that lead to our overall health and wellness in mind, body, and spirit.
It's funny that you say, you're not a therapist, but it's so lucky for your clients that you are so attuned with emotions, with how this works, because
and this could be a whole nother podcast, but the healthcare system in America it operates from people being dependent on prescription medications, dependent on surgeries and removing of organs and not healing. It's big business, keeping people sick and dependent on medication to live. Whereas when you are a holistic healer or practitioner, your goal is to educate and help your client so much that they don't need any of it. They don't need you. They don't need to go do this, because they already know. New people are always coming in, and then you start the whole education process again. And then you start devaluing your information because it's so second nature to you. You start giving information away for free.
Like, you're teaching people to be their own health gurus.
You do eventually intersect paths with someone who can help you when you start seeking. So when you start listening to your body and starting to listen to the cues and the symptoms, and really start going down that holistic health mindset road towards your own recovery and health, you bump into the teachers you need for that moment in your journey. And I've seen it in my own life and in the life of my clients as well.
Hey, thanks for listening to episode 2 of Lifeiness. I have 3 takeaways for myself and for you guys. Number 1 is that joyful planning and preparation of food are probably a little underrated. So I want to do a little bit better job doing that in my life. Second of all, is to get curious about Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine. I think these are some powerful tools here. And then third, kind of the most powerful takeaway for me was to recognize that your emotional health is not separate from your physical health, that stuck emotions can lead to a breakdown of the body. Thank you for listening to this episode of Lifeiness. I'm Professor Sarah, and until next time, begin exploring a more playful and joyful you. Embrace that girlhood energy for life.